long time. We were at the university. I was there a long time. He was too. He was a heck of a football player. You know, he was a linebacker when he started off. Had to end up being a center, and he won't tell you this, but nobody gets credit for being a center. You don't get any credit. But he was on the '64 national championship team. Has written a lot of great books, 24 of them, I think, Victor in the Game of Life, and a great book on Coach Bryant. And I'm happy. He's certainly an outstanding physician and a great friend, and appreciate so much having him on. Good morning. How you doing, Doc?
Well, I'm doing great. It's nice to be on the radio show with you. I'm looking forward to it.
I would like for you. I have in my own small way, and not certainly not like you. But this is the reason I wanted you to do it. Tell our listeners how Coach Bryant was, how as you were around him from time to time as a player, and then more than that, as a consultant, as a physician. Can you maybe explain to our listeners how Coach Bryant was? They would love to know that.
As a player, I don't think the players ever really know their coach, because you hold the coach up on a pedestal, and to us as players, he was bigger than life. And when he walked in a room, I mean, everybody just pretty much sat at attention or stood at attention. He had what I call presence. You knew when you were around him, and you knew you were in the presence of greatness. And we were just very much in awe of him as players. We'd do anything for an attaboy or a way to go or a nice job. That was all you wanted, was just some recognition from him that you had done a good job and that he appreciated your efforts. And then later on in life, I got to know Coach from a totally different perspective, and it was actually from one of our mutual friends, from Ellis Taylor, who was a coal miner in Jasper. And I met Ellis at a golf tournament in Montgomery, and we became good friends. And next thing you know, I show up at an event down in Panama City that Ellis and Red Pope and a few others used to sponsor for the coaching staff. And Coach Bryant was there, and I found myself in a situation with just him and 4 or 5 other men. And over that week, we got to know each other pretty well, and he had a lot of medical issues. And he would confide in me. He'd ask me about his medical situations, and I said, Coach, I don't really know about all of those things, but I can get you in to see the right person. And so I became, I guess, his liaison in some respect, in that I would get him in to see the right doctor after hours, and we tried to keep his illnesses out of the press. He was a very ill man when his last couple of years, and probably should not have coached football the last couple of years that he did. And I got to know him as a physician, and, you know, I saw beyond the shield. I saw that there was a very sensitive individual. As big and powerful and as awesome as he was extremely sensitive to what people thought. And I remember that we were talking one day, and he was talking about death, and he knew that it wasn't going to be too long. And he said, you know, I'm just afraid, Gaylon, I hadn't lived the kind of life that's going to allow me to get to heaven. And I said, Coach, you know, I think God does keep score. And I said, I think when he tallies up your score, you're not going to have any trouble whatsoever. They'll welcome you to pearly gates. And he was really worried. He was worried he hadn't lived the kind of life that would get him to heaven. He became very focused on death and the next part of life after that.
Well, that's so interesting. And Barry, I have something else. I'll go ahead and ask you this: during the period of time that he decides that he wants to end it as far as coaching, he leaned on you some. You all discussed some things. I'm not interested in you get any personal details, but the thing of him toying with what was getting out, feeling like that maybe he had done enough, that people didn't appreciate him. I know they didn't, because I was there. Fortunate enough to have his office after he passed away. But talk to our listeners about his feelings of getting out of coaching at Alabama.
I was with him on the day or the morning after he had made his decision to retire. He was doing his television show in Birmingham, and I met him up at the station because I was concerned about him. I'd watched him on the sidelines the day before, and it was the first time, I think, that second time that Alabama had lost in Bryant-Denny Stadium. We lost to Southern Mississippi, one of the big tall quarterback from Reggie Collier just really tore us apart that day.
Right.
And I watched him on the sidelines, and he was really not moving. He was just standing there like a big, tall old tree and not responding at all. And I was concerned about him. So I went up to the TV station and met him when he was going to do his show. And he said, "Can you stay around? I need to talk to you for a little while." And I said, "Yes, sir." So after his show, we went to lunch. Just the two of us got in a room over at Quincy's Steakhouse. The manager put us there. He said, "Gaylon, I've been up all night thinking," and he said, "It's time for me to get out. I've got to quit." He said, "I've stayed too long." He said, "I should have retired a couple of years ago." He said, "I've not done a good job the last couple of years, not really done a good job managing my coaching staff." He said, I've just got to get out. I got to quit." And he said, and I quote, "Y'all got to get somebody in here that's young enough and tough enough to weather the storm, because Alabama's in for some bad years and our people aren't going to understand why." And how prophetic was that?
Yeah.
He knew that we were going to go through bad years because he'd seen that happen at Michigan State when Duffy Daugherty stepped down. He'd seen it happen to a certain extent at Nebraska when Bob Devaney stepped down. So he knew that we were going to be in for difficult times. And, you know, young enough and tough enough to weather the storm was the words that he used. And you know, I kept that in the back of my mind as we were considering who was going to be his replacement.
Well, when people read this book, they will really, really enjoy it. I was reading only last night. Barry, you have something?
Yeah, we're talking with Dr. Gaylon McCollough. Doctor, I was reading 2017. You were on the field, I guess 100,000 people there, and you got the Paul W. Bryant Alumni Athlete Award. And I was reading in an article how you said that award meant more to you probably than any award that you've ever gotten. Explain to the listeners why.
Well, it did. You know, I knew about the award for a long, long time, and a lot of my heroes, frankly, had, and some of my teammates had received that award, and I knew what it meant, and I knew what the award stood for. And then when I heard that I had been named one of the recipients of the award, it was just incredible for me. And I was standing there at midfield on the same piece of dirt that I'd stood on many times. Actually, I played in the high school all-star game, and I stood there at midfield. I was the coach of one of the captains of the South team. So I'd been on that same tract of land, that 10 by 10 spot for a long time. And then as a freshman, I was there playing and went out for the coin toss for the freshman team, and then all throughout my college career. And then that day, though, I was standing there with the award in my hand, looking up at 100,000 people, and I reflected back to the time that I played at Alabama when 30,000 people was all that the stands would hold, and the 100,000 people, all of those people there supporting University of Alabama and Alabama sports, and just realizing that I'd been a part of it and it had been a great part of my life, and I owe everything that I've ever accomplished to my time at the University of Alabama and the mentors that I had there. So it was somewhat overwhelming. It really was. And on the way home that night, I said to my wife, Susan, I said, you know, I've got to write about this. And so I started writing, and that became Victory in the Game of Life, the book that you just referenced.
Wow. That.
Tell our listeners about the 64 team. I think it's 64. My years are run together. When you're playing center for Alabama, which is, as I've said, it's not a position that gets as much credit as certainly you should, but it was a football team of really talented kids with a very, very, very fine quarterback and certainly a great year. Talk to our listeners about that.
A lot of people can identify their football teams by who the quarterbacks were, and
Sure.
Joe Namath was the quarterback that was my contemporary. He and I went there together, and we finished our eligibility together. But many people might remember that Joe was injured during his junior year, and really was playing on a gimp knee for the rest of his career. And so he did not play the full game in every game our senior year. And Steve Sloan stepped in, and I think did an admirable job. You're talking about somebody never getting credit for what he did. Steve Sloan is probably one of the most underrated quarterbacks that ever played at Alabama, because we would not have won the national championship without Steve that year. But Joe would come in critical situations, and in some games he felt well enough to play the whole game. But we really didn't have that much talent on the team, in my opinion. We had Namath there, and we had Ray Ogden, and those two guys were the two great athletes that we had, and the rest of us were what I consider journeyman athletes. But Coach Bryant coached us to the point to where, and he said this one time, he said when they did a banquet at Enterprise my senior year, in those days it was pretty common that when you won the national championship, your hometown would have a day in your name or in your honor, and Coach Bryant came down and spoke to the banquet. And to the group of my hometown people and family, he said, Gaylon really didn't have all that much talent. But he said he didn't know he didn't, and he played like he did. And I thought, well, that's kind of a backhanded compliment, but I'll take that. If he thought that I played up to my ability and over my ability. But that was pretty much the way that our team was. We didn't have a tremendous amount of talent, but we were a cohesive group, and we loved each other. I mean, we did. We were a united group. We went out there every day at practice, and we worked hard, and we never expected to lose a game. That's something that is hard to get instilled in an individual or team's mind. We never went into a game wondering if we were going to win the game. The question in our mind is, how well are we going to play, and are we going to please Coach Bryant?
Yeah.
And I think that mental attitude is really what took us through and took us to the championship that year.
I went to a lot of your practices, and I would watch if you would see that chain up in that tower. He had it hooked together. He had it hooked up where he wouldn't fall out, but he was leaning on each side. But when he started to unhook that tower and start down the steps, you didn't know exactly who he was going to get. He may be going to get a coach. He may be going to get a player. He may not be going to get anybody. But it's the fact that you heard it unhook and you heard it come down that concerns you a little bit, and maybe you practiced a little bit harder.
That was the most ominous sign in the world. And he did it, and he turned loose of that chain, it would rattle against that metal pipe that tower was made out of. And you could hear it all over the practice field, which is a very large area, as you know. And every eye on the field, coaches, players, guests, anybody that was there to look up to the tower to see whether he was coming down in a hurry or whether he was on his way down slowly. And you didn't want to see him come down in a hurry, because if he came down in a hurry, he was coming after somebody. And I remember we were scrimmaging one day, and we heard that chain rattle, and he screamed from the top of the tower, "Get over the ball." And so we all got in our positions, and he slid down that ladder pretty much like a fireman would, and he came running right straight at us, those big number 12 boots. And I had the ball out in one hand, and I looked back through my knees, and I thought, oh, God, he's coming at me. And he put his left foot right behind me, and he kicked the right guard in the butt and kicked him all the way into the end zone. He said, "Now run the play again, see if you can score." And, boy, we blew him off the line. I mean, he knew how to get your attention, but you just never knew. You're right. When he was on that tower, every eye on the field knew it, and after every play you'd glance up there to see if he was looking your way or not. The man just had a tremendous impact or power over people. We all the coaches met, and even though I was basketball, we met back there in the back room and drank coffee. And we had a guy named Mr. Hicks who told jokes, and they were the worst jokes in the world. But if he ever got started on one and Coach Bryant walked in, it's just as you said, the joke was over. He never finished it. He dusted everything in sight. He grabbed that dust rag and he'd dust your face if he could, because it's exactly like you said. He had that way about him that when he walked in, I can recall going to him when I got the basketball job to thank him for it. And it was very interesting what he said, and he was a guy that just wowed you, so to speak. Wimp, if y'all got a minute, I'll tell you a story that I wrote about in the book that describes him as well as anything I probably could. He always had the right thing to say, no matter what the situation was, whether you won or whether you lost or whether you tied or whatever the situation was, he always had the right thing to say. So long after I played for him, I was president of the Birmingham Touchdown Club, and he was coming up to speak to the group, and I met him out at the Holiday Inn in Bessemer, and walked up. It was an evening, and I walked up, knocked on the door, and he opened the door, and he said, "Come on in." And we went in, and as we went through the living room, he had taken the desk in the living room of his suite and pulled it out in the middle of the floor. And I walked by, and there were 3 notepads, legal pads, on that desk. And I glanced at him, and we sat down, and we chatted for a little while. And I said, "Coach, I can't stand it. I've just got to ask you, those 3 legal pads over there." He said, "Hell, I ain't never told anybody this before." He said, "But that first legal pad's what I'm going to say if we get beat tomorrow. He said, the second one's what I'm going to say if we get tied. And the third one's what I'm going to say if we win." And so it occurred to me that the reason he always knew the right thing to say is that he had prepared. He called it rehearsed. He had prepared for every potential situation, and in his mind, he was ready. So he always knew the right thing to say. And that's another thing about him. He prepared harder, probably, than any of his other coaches that he went up against. And that was one of the great secrets to his success.
Wow, great story. We're talking with Dr. Gaylon McCollough. You obviously played with Coach Bryant, and when you get through, you probably said nobody's ever going to be able to even come close to what he's done here. And then here comes Coach Saban. And I think he kind of has the same demeanor. I would think, I hadn't been over there, but when he walks in a meeting room, it's quiet, probably. They probably sit up. They're going to listen to what he has to say. And I think he maybe have some of the same styles as Coach Bryant. Just maybe talk about playing for Coach Bryant and then now watching what Coach Saban has done with the tradition of this program.
Well, if you've got the book, The Long Shot of Coach Paul Bear Bryant, in the last chapter of that book, now, mind you, I wrote that book Coach Saban's first year at Alabama, and he was 7-6 that year, which is not up to Alabama standards and certainly not up to his standards. But at the last chapter of that book, I write these words. Coach Saban does not look like Coach Bryant. He does not talk like Coach Bryant. He does not walk like Coach Bryant. But between the ears, they're identical twins. And in that, I predicted that Coach Saban would be the next legend at Alabama because I could see that he was instilling, once again, all of those things that won for Coach Bryant. He may call them a little different but name, may go about it a little bit different way, but underneath it's all about the same sort of thing. His process that he calls is exactly the same thing as Coach Bryant's, quote, theory of winning at Alabama, which I have a copy of and refer to in the Victory in the Game of Life book. I was going through a trunk of things several years, about 2 or 3 years ago, and I came across that winning theory, and it was what he handed to us before we left for the summer, before the 64 season. And he said, "Here's how we're going to win the national championship next year." And he had it all planned out, and he said, "You do what I'm asking you to do." And he said, "I guarantee you, we'll win the national championship next year." And we did.
Wow. Also, talk about, I was reading, you talked about, of course, I was fortunate being in a coaching family, but Dad was here for 32 years, so I never had to move. So I Tuscaloosa is home to me. I'm back here, but I got in coaching in 19 years. I moved 8 times, so I think I made all the moves that I didn't make as a kid. But you're talking about your experience of growing up in Enterprise and how much Enterprise meant to you. Just tell the listeners a little bit about that.
Enterprise is a great town, and it has great focus on its young people. And I remember as a young person, I just felt like I was embraced by the whole city. They were very supportive of our educational program. They were very supportive of all our athletic programs, the band, the ROTC program, everything. The people turned out, and the young people there felt special. We had great superintendents of education. We had very high academic standards. 95 to 100 was an A. 86 to 94 was a B. And so you had very high standards and good leadership, good discipline, and it was like the community just went together to support the young people. And I wouldn't take anything for having grown up in that environment. And I still have very, very fond memories. I don't have very many friends that are still alive. Certainly all of my mentors have passed on. but I still do have some family members there. But it's
so
a great,
probably the only thing you didn't like is when a new coach came in and took you away from being the quarterback.
Sorry, Wimp, I didn't understand you.
I said that one of the things you probably didn't like was when the coach came in and to decide that you weren't going to be the quarterback.
Oh no, I had worked really hard, really hard. I'd worked hard to win the winning job at quarterback, and I'd won it in the spring game after my sophomore year. And so that a few days after that, our coach retired and became a principal, and we got a new coach in. And I remember the first night of the meeting. I knew that he didn't have a quarterback in his system, that he ran what was called the Notre Dame box, which is a kind of a variation of the old single wing. So that first night we're in the meeting, and he's walking up and down in front of the team, clicking his heels, and finally he turned around and he said, "Where's the big tall kid that used to play quarterback?" And my heart sank, and I thought, oh, it's all over. So he said, "I've got to talk to you after the meeting, son." So I went in there, and he said, "I don't have a quarterback in my system. I've got to move you. I want you to play. But you can be a center or you can be a tight end." Yeah. And so I did the numbers, and we had 4 guys coming back, Letterman at tight end, and 1 coming back at center. And I said, I wanted to play. I said, "Coach, I'll go to center." And so I went from being a quarterback to a center in one night. And if you don't think that isn't a blow to your ego,
that's exactly
all the hard work that you put in,
that's a blow to your ego, isn't it? Well, I'm going to tell you something. We have really enjoyed this. We play this back. We play some of these things back, and so we're going to play it back. Tell our listeners, and I appreciate you being such a friend of mine, tell our listeners how they can get your books. Wimp,
the easiest way is to call my clinic down in Birmingham, in Gulf Shores. I lived in Birmingham for 35 years, and
I knew you did.
Still have that in my mind.
Yeah.
But I live in Gulf Shores, Alabama. I have a clinic here. I still work every day. Operating, doing facial plastic surgery. And if they'll call my clinic, and it's 251-967-7000.
Okay.
And I will personally inscribe a copy of the book and send it to anybody that would like to have it. And I want to say this, all the books that I've written, and there are about 20 books, all the proceeds of those books go into a foundation for education of young people. I don't write these books to try to make money. I practice medicine to do that. So all the books are labors of love, and I would be honored to personally inscribe one to anybody.
Doc, could you do me one favor?
I sure will.
Will you do surgery on Dad and try to get that frown off of his face? Could you get that frown off of his face?
I wouldn't be able to get it out the frown.
I've thought about that for years, and I figure I'm going to have to put a team of physicians together and subcontract some of that out in order to be able to get that scowl off.
Well, whatever's me is me. Anyway, thank you so much, Doc. Good talk to you, and I appreciate it.
Great stuff.
I have enjoyed it, gentlemen. Thank you very much, Wimp, and I value your friendship, too, and all the things that you've done for the University of Alabama.
Good job.
There's Dr. Gaylon